looking at the camera. This is basically the angle. Is it too dark? Hey, what's up guys, it's Van Galta, and I'm back with another video. So today's issue is something I've been thinking about for quite a long time. Think of all the latest TV shows and movies that are coming out nowadays. I know we like to criticize them for bad acting, bad CGI, but what I have to talk about is none of those things. But by far the worst problem that our culture's entertainment is suffering from is a lack of good writing. Now, before you say, hold on, Galta, that's just a cliche. When I say bad writing, I mean the plotting is terrible, the characters aren't well laid out, and generally there is a lack of verisimilitude within the story. The story just doesn't seem believable, and it contradicts itself, and it's overall non-compelling and really dumb. So before we can even address the question, what is bad writing, we have to address the question, what is writing at all? Put simply, writing is the act of creating a world. The best writing has characters that are consistent with the world and a world that is consistent with said characters. And right now that may seem like a small thing, but the biggest problems with modern storytelling spring from these issues. Waha, says the clever postmodern artist.
Well, as everyone knows, all art is subjective.
And even though you may hate the movies coming out nowadays, you might agree to that rule. But mark my words, this is the #1 thing destroying art as we know it, especially the quality of writing. Because writing relies on verisimilitude to explain its ideas and form a world. If a world's not logically consistent, then people can see the holes through it and see the author's hand at work, and therefore it just becomes more like a presentation than it does a story. It's the same thing with the characters. If the characters are not consistent with the world, then the world just sucks. And the characters suck even more because they're placed in a world that doesn't make sense for them. Keeping this verisimilitude, or keeping this believability within the logic of a story is exactly what makes writing great. Of course, we can talk about themes and such, but themes don't make a story great.
But
Interjects the postmodernist again.
things like plot and characters, these don't even matter. After all, it is completely made up. Why not just give Ray force powers?
Well, if we were to follow this train of thought logically, it would be that there is no bad writing. In fact, there's not really any writing at all. It's just one big mess. Nothing makes sense because nothing has to make sense. Verisimilitude is thrown in the garbage because it doesn't matter if things are logical anymore. It leads you to a place where there's no meaning in art, where art is merely subjective. So we come back to the question, is art subjective? I don't want to have to get too deep, but you do realize this is a more fundamental problem with art than you realized. So let's just use the logical method. Do we admit to good and bad writing? If you say no, then art really has no meaning at all. But I'm just going to assume, for sake of argument, that most people here would tell me that there's good and bad writing. So you can have good and bad without there being a standard, right? After all, if there's no standard to shoot for, then everything's on the same level. So there has to be a measurement or a standard that tells us what's good and bad writing. So the best we can get here is how well a story can tell a story without contradicting itself. Then we kind of get into theme, but theme is the garnish. Theme is the cherry that goes on top of the cake. The actual bare bones of what makes writing good is maintaining this internal consistency. No consistency, bad story. High consistency, good story. So if you get a story like the Star Wars sequels, which I seriously hate, if you follow my blog, you know how much I hate the Star Wars sequels. You kind of get this disfigured mess. After all, there's plenty of things that I can name right off the top of my head that don't concur with the logic of the Star Wars universe. For example, training is necessary to use the Force. This was the premise of the entire original series. Luke needs to learn the Force so he can become a Jedi. He doesn't just magically gain his abilities because he has all the cheat codes. However, Rey is granted all the privileges. She starts at level 70. Rey doesn't need training because, she started at level 70 with all the legendary items. I'm sorry, but that does not excuse you from breaking the laws of the universe. Similarly, the character Captain Marvel from the MCU has near limitless ability, but why doesn't she use it all the time? After all, for almost all of Endgame, she is away doing something else. Only to come back 3/4 of the way through the movie to just single-handedly destroy Thanos' ship. Wouldn't it have been just way more satisfying if Captain Marvel would have just been there at the beginning of the story? As soon as Thanos showed up, she'd be like, all right, frick it, let's break his ship. And then Thanos was just dead. The entire conflict is solved. what the heck, guys? This is like how it should have ended. When characters do illogical things, they are breaking verisimilitude, therefore making a worse story. So how do we fix this problem? So first, we have to say that there is good art and there is bad art. Art is not subjective. And our main standard for what would be good art and what would be bad art is how well it maintains that internal consistency, the degree to which it doesn't contradict itself, while weaving in all of these nice themes and interesting characters and all that great stuff. Breaking this fundamental rule is what destroys writing, and that's what we have today. Usually when that happens to a character, we call it a Mary Sue or a Gary Stu. And when this happens to the universe, we call it a plot hole. Plot holes and Mary Sues are the two banes of a writer's existence. Which takes me to my final point. So these are professional writers, right? They write for a living. Shouldn't they actually just be good at their craft?
Are you serious?
Well, the answer is they don't need to be. You see, movies, books, TV shows, whatever you want to call it, whatever kind of art, has an extreme allure to the crowd. This means the crowd is willing to pay tons of money. So in effect, the old idiom is true. They don't really care about telling a good story because they don't need to. All they need to do is make back that $2 billion. And the sad thing is that people won't cancel their subscription to Disney+. Guys, you are not helping. You are literally funding Disney. And Disney is going to continue to put crap out there. You pay for Disney, you pay for HBO, you pay for all this garbage, then you're going to get garbage. It's that simple. But outside of that, there's not really anything we can do about it. That is, unless filmmakers start caring more about story and less about money, which is basically impossible because movies make so much money. Basically, you can make a good story or you can make $17 billion. And with an entire movie riding on how many explosions there are or how much uncovered skin there is in a certain scene, I think it's kind of impossible that there is going to be any kind of meaningful reform, at least soon in the future. But my writers out there in the audience, you can make a difference. You can hold your own. You can hone your craft. You can say no to the stupid postmodernists who believe that art is subjective. But deep down, this reform happens in the hearts and minds of the artists, not the hearts and minds of the audience. I don't believe that people can take much more of this garbage. But hey, maybe they can, and maybe I'm wrong. But the fact remains, modern storytelling sucks. And all because there's dollars on the line. But after all, artists are business people now. Whatever the marketer thinks the show is going to have to be, the show is going to have to be, regardless of how many Mary Sues and plot holes the story may have. But anyway, guys, that's it for the video. Thank you for tuning in on my rant. For those of you looking for a nice new fantasy read, you should check out my book, From Praetors of Lost Magic, Book 1, The Mage's Gambit. It's a really fun read. Crap, I made a mouse noise. I know I don't have too many fans out there, but you should still buy it. And on the most important note of all, I've decided to change my extremely bad outro. Of course, I could have just cut right to the bloopers, right? Everyone wants a fascinating and interesting outro.